Definitely a step back. This roster is not as good as it was at the end of this past season. And you're absolutely right. That's the most angered, annoyed, however you want to put it, I've seen Jerry Jones since I've covered the team. Yeah, I mean, if they were playing a game today, there's significant drop-off from last year. I do think, though, that with a second-round pick, maybe even their first, but I would think more like a second or third, they're going to draft another receiver. And
you got your Mac and Mac guys here on Birds 365. Jody McDonald, John McMullen. We're joined by Jon Machota. Hey, he's got good initials. It's JM,
Yes.
and JM here on Birds 365. Johnny M, how you been?
I've been good, man. Just waiting for these Cowboys to make a big splash in free agency. But, oh, wait, all the big-time players are gone. I guess that's not going to happen.
There's a few. Bobby Wagner out there would make a bit of a splash, I would think, for the Cowboys. And it makes some sense with Dan Quinn. But, I guess, John, I'll go back to Jerry Jones seemed really sort of torn up after the season this year than most years. I thought he thought, a lot of us thought, the Cowboys had a real chance to make a run. And there was a lot of talent. And he knew he was going to lose some of that talent. And here we are. And they've lost some talent. Amari Cooper, Lyle Collins, Randy Gregory, Cedric Wilson. Where are the Cowboys here after this first wave of free agency? Have they taken a significant step back from a talent standpoint?
Yeah, I don't know if it's significant. It's definitely a step back. This roster is not as good as it was at the end of this past season. And you're absolutely right. That's the most angered, annoyed, however you want to put it, I've seen Jerry Jones since I've covered the team, and the fan base is on the same level. So then you go into this offseason and you're not really making any big moves, and you break everything down of who they've added and who they've lost. And it's made for the most frustrated Cowboys fan base since I've covered the team. So the one thing that they have going for them is that they're in the NFC East, and it still remains, they still should be the favorite in that. And if you win that, then obviously you still get in the playoffs. But that's the big thing, that they haven't done anything on the roster to make you think, well, this season's going to be a lot different than last season was. Now the biggest things they were able to pull off is that most of us didn't think there's any way that they were bringing back Kellen Moore and Dan Quinn as their offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator. It just seemed like one of them guys was going to get a head job, and they didn't. So they were able to keep the staff all intact. Obviously, they have their key pieces in Dak Prescott, and on defense, you still have, DeMarcus Lawrence and Micah Parsons and Trayvon Diggs and all that. But that wasn't good enough to get past the first round of the playoffs, and you hosted a playoff game. Why should anyone think that it's going to be any different next year? It's to the point where, yeah, they'll add pieces in the draft, but if you're a fan of this team or you watch this team, they can go and win 11, 12, 13 games next year, and everyone's still throughout the entire season be like, yeah, that's nice. They did that last year. Yeah, that's nice. Cool. Yeah, they had those wins last year. What are they going to do in the postseason? And so when you don't improve the roster, there's no reason to think that it's going to be any better than last season was. And no one around here is acting like, oh, double-digit wins would be some great thing. Winning the NFC East would be some great thing. No one cares about that. Mike McCarthy was hired because it was to win playoff games and make a run finally. And so there's nothing they've done so far that makes you think it's going to be any different than it has been in the past.
Let me get very positional specific with you. Defensive end. Randy Gregory looked like they had a deal done, but he didn't like the language in the contract where he could lose guarantees if he was just fined, not suspended. The Broncos were willing to include that language, and for basically the same deal, he left town to go. Now, we know Randy Gregory is one bad incident away from being suspended, but that didn't happen this year, and the Cowboys had been good to him, yet they seemed to draw a line in the sand here that seemed to be a mistake. They replaced him with Dante Fowler, but I don't think he's an equivalent player. Did the Cowboys, in your estimation, mishandle the Randy Gregory situation?
They probably did in terms of the language in the contract. Now, I don't think it was a surprise to him. I don't think it was they tried to slide something in at the last second, that just the way their language and their contracts are. And so when they came back, they probably should have given in a little bit if they really wanted him that bad. And there's a lot of surprised people in the building that didn't get done. They figured that was going to get done, especially when, they were given the chance to match what the Broncos offer was, that it was okay, well, they're going to get this done. He wants to stay here. He's had success here this past season. Everything seems like it's trending in the right direction. And it didn't happen. And so obviously the Cowboys look bad for not getting that deal done. At the same time, though, I also look at it from this standpoint of, yeah, you're better with Randy Gregory than without him, but also that contract he was getting. I don't know if we haven't already seen Randy Gregory's best days. I mean, this past season, this past year was always going to be for Randy his best chance to get his big contract. And I mean, I'm not trying to put everything on sack. He had 6 sacks. Like, I mean, yeah, you got to replace the guy, but let's not act like you're replacing. Like, I don't know how we're going to make up for those 15 sacks. Like, I mean, yeah, you lost him. You look silly for the way it went down. You probably should have given in a little bit, but let's also not act like, they're losing Von Miller in his prime. Like, they can do a couple different things and be able to replace Randy Gregory's production. But still, losing him doesn't make the team better.
Is one of those different things, John, playing Micah Parsons more as a edge rusher, or have they decided, no, he's going to have more of an impact as an off-ball linebacker? Or is it going to be, as coordinators will like to say, and I'm sure Dan will say, it's week to week, and they always say that kind of stuff, but you kind of watch what they do, not what they say. Where do they want to play Micah Parsons?
If it was up to Dan Quinn and Mike McCarthy, they would, I mean, and everything was perfect in a perfect world, he would stay at linebacker, and then every game be in a different spot. Sometimes he would just stay at linebacker. Other games he would play a little bit more rushing off the right, a little more rushing off the left, maybe even a little bit more rushing up the middle. Other games he's playing more linebacker the entire time. They would love for him to always just be that chess piece that the opponent from week to week doesn't really know where Micah Parsons is going to be at that week, where Micah Parsons is going to be at from play to play. I just say that that's in a perfect world, because while they want that, if the guys right now that they have on the roster that are there to replace Randy Gregory at right end are Dante Fowler, who they just signed to a very cheap 1-year deal, and then Dorrance Armstrong, which is a very team-friendly 2-year deal. If those guys aren't getting to the quarterback, your hand's forced. You're going to have to move Micah down there and get pressure somehow. You're not going to be able to just sit back and go, well, we prefer to have Mike at Mike linebacker. No, you're going to have to move things around and change some pieces around and do some things like that. But now Cowboys roster is not done. Certainly they could add another, edge rushing piece and things like that. But if they had enough pass rush up front, they would love to be able to keep Micah Parsons at linebacker, just so that from play to play, they don't really know if he's rushing, if he's dropping, if he's covering, if he's coming from the right, up the middle, left, where it's at. That's when they believe he's at his best.
John, the Eagles and the Cowboys were in a similar situation this offseason in one respect. That was safety. Both of the Eagles safeties were free agents at the end of the year. Both of the Cowboys safeties were free agents at the end of the year. The Eagles brought back Anthony Harris. The Cowboys brought back both Malik Hooker and Jaron Kearse. When the Eagles re-signed Anthony Harris, my response was, not overly excited, but he's not terrible either. So, okay. What was your thought process? What was your reaction when the Cowboys re-signed both of their free agent safeties?
Well, Jaron Kearse was a must re-sign. He was just so good last year for him. Him and Dan Quinn, they just worked together so well. And Jaron Kearse had a career year, and it really makes you think that his best years are still ahead of him. So while Dan Quinn's success with Micah Parsons is what is stood out the most from this past season, there's no question him and Jaron Kearse and the way that he used Jaron Kearse has been some of the best safety play that we've seen in Dallas in a decade. And while on paper, I can see it, other teams in the league, other fans in the league go, oh, Malik Hooker, Jaron Kearse, that's not that big of a deal. But in Dallas, you're talking about a franchise for the last decade that has spent the least in the entire NFL at the safety position. No one is invested less than the Cowboys at safety, whether it's draft picks, free agents, what have you. So bringing back Kearse was a big move, because it just showed you that, yeah, they are really committed. And I think that has a lot to do with Dan Quinn being in the room and them listening like, hey, Dan really wants this guy. We trust Dan. The defense is his baby. If he thinks that this guy is that important, we have to get something done there. And then Malik Hooker, last year, he showed some signs of being kind of the player that he was before the Achilles, but I don't think he was all the way back. Now you're 2 years removed from his Achilles injury that he had in Indianapolis. So, and then they have Donovan Wilson as their third safety. Again, if you're an outsider looking at the Cowboys roster, you might not be blown away with the safety position, but it is the best the safety position's been here in at least a decade.
One thing the Cowboys have been known for in recent years, John, is the offensive line. And when you have, understandably so, future Hall of Fame right guard, Zach Martin, got probably a future Hall of Fame left tackle, Teron Smith, but there has been some change. And I mentioned Lyle Collins earlier. Connor McGovern is back, I believe. They lost somebody. Did they lose somebody to Miami? Am I missing?
Connor Williams, their left guard.
Connor Williams, yeah. So that's basically 40% of their projected now. I know Terrence Steele played a lot, but how much is that offensive line going to be impacted by losing Williams and Collins?
Well, I'm glad that you asked that right off of the safety question, because everything I said about safety, it's the complete opposite with the offensive line. This is the weakest the offensive line has been in the last decade. That was, like you said, that's been, the face of it. Jason Garrett built, when he took over as head coach, his first pick as head coach was Tyron Smith. It was going to be, we're turning over this offensive line. When he was with the Cowboys in the early 90s, they won with obviously they were loaded everywhere, but particularly in the offensive line, they were great. So when he was here, it was, first round pick on Tyron Smith, first round Zach Martin, first round on Travis Frederick. Lyle Collins, they were able to sign, who was a first round talent. It was like the Cowboys offensive line was going to be their biggest investment piece. And we've seen it age to the point where Tyron Smith isn't the Tyron Smith he was in the past in terms of his effectiveness and just staying healthy. Lyle Collins the last 2 years just was not the guy that he was prior to that. So them releasing him wasn't a huge surprise. It's a little bit surprising just because he is a starter, but he was not the same player recently. Connor Williams, who signed with Miami, I didn't get the sense that they were going to try and bring him back. Left guard was always going to be a spot that they were going to address this offseason. And I would say right now the odds-on favorite for being their first-round pick at 24 I think will be an offensive lineman that probably will fit in that left guard spot. But it's not like center is just, Tyler Biadasz has been okay, but he's nowhere near obviously what Travis Frederick was. So there's more question marks in the offensive line than there has been in the last decade. And even with those guys that we were just talking about last year, the offensive line was arguably the most disappointing thing on the team. They weren't able to get the run game going during the back half of the season. They had issues protecting Dak. They certainly had issues with penalties. They were a big reason why the Cowboys are the most penalized team in the NFL. So there was just not the same discipline there. So you can tell that they're going through a process now where they're shaking it back up and trying to reset this offensive line. And the most interesting thing to me is that, so when Jason Garrett was the head coach, it was, we're going to invest first round picks there. But if you look at Mike McCarthy's history in Green Bay, and I know he didn't have the say in the draft that he does now, but when he was in Green Bay, they were notorious for finding the David Bakhtiaris in the fourth rounds, the Linsleys, the Josh Sittons, the TJ Langs. They weren't investing the first round picks to build all of this. Now they did some with like Brian Bulaga, but they found a lot of fourth, fifth round guys that come in and be starters. The Cowboys haven't done that. And so it'll be interesting to see his impact on this draft, because the offensive line needs more. You just can't, having a future Hall of Famer in Zach Martin still playing at a high level just alone, that's not going to be enough. They need help on that offensive line big time.
All right, John, I want to talk about the wide receiver position, because there are pretty big changes for the Cowboys there. They decided to move away from Amari Cooper and his big cap number, end up trading for the Cleveland for not much, but to get cap relief. They allowed Cedric Wilson to go out the door to Miami. Miami must have liked the Cowboys. They signed a couple of Cowboys this offseason. And I'm a Cedric Wilson fan, and I thought he was a really good. If Gallup's healthy, he's your 4 at the start of the season. Moved into the 3 role. I think he's one of the better 3 wide receivers, and he's going to be the 3 wide receiver down in Miami. So he's going to be really good there. But the Cowboys lost got Gallup back from injury, added Washington. How much of a drop-off from where they started last year is the Cowboy wide receiver room going into this year? Even if we start with the premise that, yes, CeeDee Lamb was one of the best 2s in the league. He'll be one of the better 1s in the league. He's that kind of a star that being asked to elevate, he'll do that. Even accepting that, do you see a drop-off in the Cowboy wide receiver production?
Yeah, if they were playing a game today, there's significant drop-off from last year. I do think, though, that with a second-round pick, maybe even their first, but I would think more like a second or third, they're going to draft another receiver. And that's the one thing. Like I didn't hate the Amari Cooper move just from the perspective that I do believe that wide receiver is the easiest position to fill via the draft.
Not here, John. We
yeah,
can't.
well,
Yeah, some
The
people
Eagles
would
have
say
been
that,
looking for a
John,
receiver.
not
Yeah.
Philadelphians.
yeah, that's true. That's a good point. I just across the league, you just see so many teams
There are.
find guys second round, third round, some in the fourth round. Where again, I'm not talking about finding your one, and their one is CeeDee Lamb, and he was their one last year. Even though Amari Cooper salary wise said it, CeeDee Lamb was their most productive receiver. So I just think that everyone gets bumped up a spot. And so CD's your one now, Michael Gallup's your two. So if you're looking for a number 3 receiver, you should be able to find that in the second or third round. And then you mix in James Washington in there. That should be a solid 4 guys right there that you have on the field at any given time. So, unlike edge rusher and some of the, and obviously quarterback and left tackle, where it's like, you better do that in the first round, or you're not going to get anybody that's making an impact year one. I do think at wide receiver, you could potentially find that guy. So for that reason, I didn't absolutely hate the Amari Cooper thing. And let's be honest, kind of like I was saying earlier about the Gregory season last year, they had all those pieces that, look great on paper. And what did it get them? I mean, I don't know. Maybe I missed the parades. I didn't see any banners being hung. I didn't even see any NFC championship game appearances. So there's a part of me where it's like, all right, well, maybe it needs to be reshuffled because there was just too many games, particularly against good teams down the back half of last season, where I was like, you have all these receivers, and how is the offense looking like this? Like, yeah, sure, you guys are putting up huge numbers against all these teams that have no chance of making the playoffs. But when you're facing the good teams, like you're facing the San Franciscos and Arizonas and teams like that even the Raiders, like where was this big production? And so because of that, you just felt like that there was a good chance that Cooper was out and that they're going to have to address this in the draft.
Well, John, one of those biggest names in Dallas is obviously Ezekiel Elliott at a devalued position, let's be honest, around the NFL. He's not the player he once was. I think we can all agree with that. What is it about Ezekiel Elliott that the Cowboys don't want to move on from him?
His agent did a phenomenal job with his contract, because if his contract was set up the same exact way and structured as Amari Cooper's, I mean, there's a good chance Ezekiel Elliott is gone with the rest of those guys too. But his money is guaranteed this year. I mean, this is the final year. Next year, they can get out of the contract and save some money and things like that. And if he doesn't have a big year, that's what will likely happen, because I think it's pretty safe to say the Cowboys aren't going to be spending big on running back anytime in the near future. So they'll be doing bargain bin shopping there for a while. They're not going to put themselves in this position again. It just, they did that deal because the way that Jason Garrett structured his team, he needed, he had the offensive line. They were going to be a big time running team. He needed what he would always say, his bell cow back. I mean, these guys nowadays, these offensive coordinators, coach, they're not doing that anymore at running back. Outside of maybe Tennessee, teams are multiple back. I mean, I really think the blueprint to the running back play in the NFL is the stuff we've seen over the past 5-6 years out of San Francisco. You don't need one guy like that. Split it between a couple different guys, and you're not heavily invested in any of them. But yeah, if Zeke's contract was different, he wouldn't be back. But he most likely wouldn't be back. But now, when he was healthy last year, he looked a little bit like the old Zeke, but it's hard to sit there and watch him over the last few years and think his best ball is still ahead of him. I mean, he just has so much wear and tear on him from early in his career, his time at Ohio State. I mean, he is a physical runner. It's not, I grew up watching Barry Sanders, where it was like he never really seemed like there was a good lick ever on him. And Zeke, it's like, it's rare where he doesn't get a good lick on him. It's like almost every run is like a car accident, just a huge collision.
Yeah. Real quick, John, because there is a change, you got the huge dead cap hit. So it's understandable, but the Eagles set the precedent last year with Carson Wentz. Now it's exploded again with Matt Ryan. Was there any talk about the Cowboys just taking that dead money hit, which I think is $30 million or so, and just moving on? No talk whatsoever with Ezekiel Elliott?
None that I had heard of. No, it was, that's the guaranteed money. They're not going to save anything on the cap by letting him go. They're going to still have to owe him. So it was like, this is the spot we're in. Now, I will say they didn't do him any favors. I shouldn't say they didn't do him. He wanted to play through. He was dealing with a knee issue last year for the back half of the season, and he probably shouldn't have been out there as much as he was. He wanted to play through it. It wasn't a knee injury that would sideline you. So he'd rehab during the week. He'd go out there, but you just could tell in a lot of those games, like the best way to get the best Zeke is he probably needed to play every other week. He needed to have a week off, have a week off, play to get the best out of him last year after that knee issue. So now that he's healthy, but again, back to his physical running style, it's how long do you stay healthy? So I think everyone down here pretty much views it as this is finally the year that Tony Pollard's going to get more of a workload, whether it be as a receiver, running back, more touches. See, he dealt with his own foot issue with the plantar fasciitis, because if that doesn't happen, I think you would have saw that during the back half of the season. But now it's time, that they're not going to, there's no reason that you're just going to keep running Zeke into a wall. I just think that you're going to see more carries out of Tony Pollard here and then mix it up more.
John, last one for me, and I think you're being a little harsher on your Cowboys. You said they couldn't beat a playoff team in the second half of the season. Oh, I can tell you one they beat. That would be the Philadelphia Eagles. All right, so maybe the Eagles put their JV team out there, and that really shouldn't count. Maybe you're onto something. I do want to give some credit to your owner, Jerry Jones, because a lot of people have this perception of him that he's hands-on and he's always ready to pull the plug on the coach. But yet Jason Garrett probably overstayed his welcome by about 3 years. So Jerry really does give his coach a chance. And after that major letdown with that home playoff loss, certainly the rumors were flying, Mike McCarthy, see you later, bye. And he didn't. And Jerry came out pretty quickly after he got over his first upsetness with the loss. He came out and he stood by McCarthy and said, we're not going to make a coaching change. And they didn't. So I give Jerry credit. Number one, he's got more patience than most people give him credit for. And number two, he ends up doing what he's saying. Now, sometimes he says something quickly and acts on it, and he gets it either right or wrong. But he is a man of his word. I'll give him that much, at least when it comes to the coaching hire. All that being said, how hot a seat is McCarthy on this season?
Oh, it's really hot. I mean, this is the thing. You mentioned that how, mad he was at the end of the season. And, he was clearly frustrated because that not only was it a talented roster, but it was one that was healthy at the right time. This should have been when that was their best chance to make a deep playoff run in a while. And so he was certainly disappointed with that. But the other part you have to factor in here is you can only be as hard-nosed on your coaching changes as your options. And I just didn't see a lot of options out there at the time that would make a lot of sense from changing directions from Mike McCarthy. Are you going to all of a sudden go with like McDaniel and a young coach? Are you going to hand it over to a young coach like Kellen Moore? You could have, I guess, handed it over to Dan Quinn if you felt like that was the move. But it's not like Sean Payton said that, like, I want the Cowboys job, I'm leaving New Orleans because I want to coach the Cowboys or something like that. Like, that's always going to be, the Sean Payton thing's always going to be there. And so if Sean Payton wanted to coach the Cowboys and they were going to work out some type of a deal, maybe things would be different. But I don't think Jerry had a lot of options to go in a different direction. As angry as he was at the end of the season, I think sitting down with Steven, and this is a key part in it too, as every year goes by, Steven has more and more say, more and more responsibility. He's one of the biggest reasons why they are so frugal, especially in free agency. He's big on them, staying under the cap and not spending big on any individual. Because that's certainly not in Jerry's DNA. Jerry's DNA is to, shake things up, make the big moves, big splashes. Not that that's done much for them lately, but you can see the influence from Steven. And I think Steven really likes Mike McCarthy. And I think that that's probably helped behind the scenes too. So, but with all of that said, if things go the same way this year, then they'll be going in another direction, at the end of the season. So yeah, to answer your question, yeah, the seat's certainly hot. I mean, not only do you need to probably win the division, but you're going to have to win multiple playoff games for it to look like this is going in the right direction. I just don't see how they can go less than that and then just keep going. And that's in the same direction they have been for the last few years.
All right, John, final one from me, at Jon Machota. Follow him on Twitter. Best in the business, as far as I'm concerned, covering the Dallas Cowboys. Gave you a little hint at the Athletic beat writer's mock draft. He kind of hinted where the Cowboys are going to go in the first round. Your Cowboys to-do list as well. I'm going to end it with a famous Jody McDonald hypothetical. You mentioned what Mike McCarthy has to do. What if they make the playoffs, they win the NFC East, they win a playoff game, and then they lose, and Sean Payton says, you know what, I'm going to come back. Is Sean Payton, under those circumstances, the next head coach of the Dallas Cowboys?
That's a great hypothetical. Yeah, I think it comes down to how bad Sean Payton wants to be the Cowboys coach and what his plan would be for the Cowboys. But I mean, man, it's you would think I mean, just on paper, everything that Jerry said, it would certainly seem, and everything he's done, it would seem like that would be the direction they go, that they would go to Sean Payton. But I guess it all depends on how the season is. I mean, if they're fully healthy and it looks similar to this past season, and it's the same thing all over again, except that they win a wild card game, yeah, I think there's a good chance that they go in another direction. But if they're all beat up and then they get in there and it kind of looks like, man, I can't believe they even were able to get this far, then Mike McCarthy probably coaches another year. But the Sean Payton thing, it's a good thing to bring up because it really is the one. And then now with him, looks like he's going to be on TV all the time. His name is just going to be out there for multiple jobs, but there's just always that connection with the Cowboys. And he's so far ahead of anybody else that would be out there that would make any sense for the Cowboys. He's the one name that can really force Jerry, even if things look like they're going in the right direction, to force Jerry, especially as he's getting older in life, looking around him like, I got to make this move now or never. That is a possibility. Certainly it is. I mean, it's a great hypothetical. I can't say 100% for certain, but knowing how Jerry Jones is, if there isn't an NFC championship game appearance, I would think that he'd be willing to go in another direction, especially if it involves Sean Payton.
Good job out of you, McMullen. Perfect hypothetical question. I lied. I got one more question for you, Machota, before we let you go. After the emotion had died down on the final play of the Cowboys season in the locker room, day after, calling the refs into question, the referee did exactly what he was supposed to do on that play. It was a risky call. Dak didn't hand the ball to him. It wasn't the referee's fault at all, although everybody blamed the referee after the game. Did they, either on the record or off the record, come back and go, yeah, we kind of called it and we rolled the dice and it came up craps on us? May even be able to say, I'd do it again, but we just need to do it slightly better than the way we did it. Did they at least back off their criticism of the ref after the famed Dak takeoff?
I haven't heard from one person that said that they should have done it differently within the organization, or that they should have done it different in terms of people that were involved with that play being called and the way it went down, that they would do it differently. Which is, it leaves you just scratching your head because, well, one, and that game should never even have come down to that. I mean, you got the ball back 2:50 to go. You still got the 2-minute warning, 3 timeouts. San Francisco doesn't have Fred Warner or Nick Bosa on the field. They're both out of the game. Like, you're at home. Like, last time I checked, every other NFC or every other playoff team that opened the wild card at home won at home. Like, you had to, everything was a layup there. It should never even come down to that last, ditch effort. And let's say he places it perfectly, whatever. The idea that you even would get to score a touchdown in that play, on that one final play, is just, I mean, come on now. Like, it just sounded like excuse making for a team that knew that they didn't come close to meeting their expectations. So there was that frustration after the game. So it's like, let's blame the refs for not doing this. It's like, you guys had so many opportunities. To blame the refs is just ridiculous. But that was their theme throughout the back end of the season, because they were the most penalized team. And if you're the most penalized team, you will always be able to be it's not just the other team we're playing. We're also playing the refs. I don't know, man. That's just like a loser mentality to me. Like, okay, well, there's things you can do differently to stop being penalized. There's a lot of stuff that was happening before the ball was even snapped that they were getting penalized for. So that's something that this offseason they certainly have to look in the mirror about and change. Mike McCarthy has said that. I mean, when he has talked since the season has ended about the biggest things that they need to clean up and improve on, he has constantly said the penalties, because they cannot be the most penalized team. I'm sorry. It's not going to happen. They're not going to be making a deep playoff run if they're that same team playing defensively like they were, committing those penalties. So, yeah, there's a lot of looking in the mirror that has to happen. But no, I haven't heard anyone sit there and openly admit that, yeah, we messed that thing up. We should have done this. That's the way they were taught it in practice. They ran it just like they did in practice.
They stuck put to their guns. Fine. And that's shocking you said that about the referee, because that never happens here in Philadelphia. Eagle fans never blame the referee. It's always part of the conversation. John, your conversation was great, as it always is. Whenever you come on, we'll get you on either right before the draft or after the draft again as well. Thank you very much for coming on with us today.
Thanks for having me on. I always enjoy talking to you guys.
Our pleasure. Jon Machota does an outstanding job covering the Cowboys. I didn't want to tie him down and make him go, the Cowboys are worse, right?
They are worse.
He pretty
They
much
are
said the
worse.
Cowboys are worse without directly saying. He pretty much told you that.
Hard Knocks is out, Jody. Before we hit the break, think about who's going to be on Hard Knocks. I'll give
they've
it to you
already
after the break.
dedicated the team?
Yeah.
Wow, they don't usually do that this early, do they?
NFL meetings are this week. I don't, but it's out.
Okay.
It's out.
I'll give it
You're
a
gonna
thought
be
during the
excited.
break. We'll come back. I'll take a guess. We've got to put a bow on the show here on Birds 360.